Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. It's Thursday, the 30th of April. And tonight, joining me via Skype this evening is Chris McCusker, our regular contributor from the SNP's Socialist Group. Good evening, Chris.
How are we going?
I'm fine tonight, Chris. Thank you very much. We'll also be being joined by Sam Payton of the Save Loch Lomond campaign a little later on in the programme. But first of all, the coronavirus update for today. As of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 54,639 coronavirus tests concluded. And of these, 43,286 tests were confirmed negative. 11,353 tests were positive. 109 patients were in intensive care last night, with 101 of those having tested positive. There were a total of 1,748 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19. This marks an increase of 319 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 1,475. This number only includes those who have died in hospital after getting a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 26,711 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 674. Again, this only refers to those who have died in hospital following a positive test. So, Chris, the figures today are still showing a very gradual decline, it seems. It looks as though they have either flatlined or are beginning to very gradually diminish. It looks as if there are one or two fewer people in hospital than the last time I looked.
Yeah, but again, it's not a time to be complacent in any such way, shape or form. And although these figures are welcome, we still have to carry on doing what we're all doing. And try and minimise the effects. As I said earlier on in the week, the last thing that the whole of the UK wants to see is a possible second phase. Yeah,
indeed. Well, Chris, I'm going to move to our first story now, which also concerns the coronavirus. Now, this story concerns the new COVID-19 contact tracing app. Leading privacy advocates in Britain have urged the government to prevent a soon-to-be-launched COVID-19 contact tracing app from turning into a form of state surveillance. Countries are rushing to develop apps which can, along with wider testing and tracking programs, are seen as a key to easing social distancing rules that have all but shut global economies. Matthew Gould, the chief executive of the National Health Services Technology Group NHSX, told the Parliamentary Committee on Tuesday that an app could be rolled out widely in Britain in 2 or 3 weeks. It will keep a record of anonymised tokens or identities of those people the phone's owner has been in contact with. This data will stay on the phone until the owner becomes symptomatic, when they will have the option to submit the data to the app, alerting those with whom they came into contact. Leading academics and scientists working in security and privacy universities across Britain published a joint letter saying that people would only adopt the app if they felt their privacy was protected. It's vital that when we come out of the current crisis, we have not created a tool that enables data collection on the population or on targeted sections of society for surveillance, they said. In Europe, most countries have chosen short-range Bluetooth handshakes between mobile devices as the best way to register a potential contact, although it does not provide location data. But they have disagreed about whether a log of such contacts on individual devices or on a central server, which would be more directly useful to existing contact tracing teams. Germany recently changed course, saying it would join a growing number of other European countries in adopting a decentralised approach supported by Apple and Google. Gould told the Parliamentary Committee that he believed the British app would protect privacy, even though it would build a centralised system. He said NHSX would publish the privacy model close to launch. He said later versions of the app could also ask users to provide more details, such as location, if they agreed. We really believe there are big advantages to the way we are doing it, and we don't believe it's privacy endangering, he said. Gould was asked during the hearing whether Britain's National Cyber Security Centre was involved in the decision to adopt a more centralised approach. He said that the body had been a part of the discussions. Now, Chris, this is a very obvious one of those cases where it's a toss-up between safety and surveillance. Just before I come to that, Chris, I'd just like to welcome Sam back to the show. Welcome back, Sam Payton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign.
How are you?
Sorry, Sam, we had trouble getting hold of you earlier on this evening.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you back.
How are you?
Okay, so we have a story here about a phone app which is going to send data on the people that you may have come into contact with during, I guess, the lockdown phase. So what do we think? Is this going to be, well, if I come to you first, Sam, since you've just joined us, do we think this is going to be an invasion of privacy, or is this something that we might have to learn to live with, do you think?
Right, I'm going to give my own personal opinion on this, and I'm going to be quite kind of blunt about it. I believe it is an invasion of privacy, and I don't trust apps and things like this, because I think it will be used as a data collection when the crisis is over. You know, yes, I can see how it could help if majority of people signed up to it, and it would only work if the majority of the population would signed up to it. If the majority of the population don't sign up to it, then it's not going to work.
Indeed,
and I think
but
also as well.
Well, it does. It does at least. It seems to be a voluntary system, Sam.
Yeah,
so
it is voluntary. But if people don't sign up, it's not really going to work. But also as well, I think if we relying on technology sometimes makes people slightly complacent as well in terms of social distancing and things like that. I think if people were going to use it, it needs to be used as an additional tool, not to be relied upon. But I would be very concerned about the data collection, because there is no way that this would be used and there would be no data collection going on. So I would be concerned about what happens with information afterwards. But that's my personal view, and people would need to look into that and make their own decision themselves as to whether they felt they would benefit from it or not.
Okay, thank you, Sam. If I can come to you, Chris, the last sentence that I read there, which said that Gould was asked during the hearing whether Britain's National Cyber Security Centre was involved, and he said they had been. Is this not pointing to the involvement of the security services in the design of this app, Chris?
Well, this is why I've got real misgivings about the whole thing. I mean, anybody that has read Orwell's 1984 will be sort of like looking behind their shoulder twice as we're discussing this. And if there is a interference at a government level, where you're getting into the realms of, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, then that will make people second guess it and sort of like say, is this really, as intrusive as it is? I agree with Sam, to a certain degree, and my kids actually look at me and shake their heads and say, why don't you have this app? Why don't you have that app? And why don't you have the next thing? Yeah. And it will be a generational thing, I'm sure. I mean, out with Spotify and the weather app and stuff like that. Things like tracking your health and stuff like that is really not at the forefront of everybody's mind on a day-to-day basis. However, during a pandemic, then some people will be more keen to take it up without actually looking into who's actually behind it, kind of thing,
Okay. What I was going to say, Chris, was that I'm not sure if there's a lifespan to this particular application on the phone. It could well be. I mean, they haven't said that this is a temporary measure that will actually be taken offline after its usefulness is over. They haven't said that at all, which I think perhaps they should have.
But then maybe, and I don't want to give false hope here, but maybe they haven't said it because the government know that COVID-19 is going to be around for a long time to come.
Yeah.
So they can't put a time limit on it, and that's possibly going to be a bit worrying as well. Mm-hmm. But anything, I mean, look, and I'm not grabbing my tinfoil hat when I say this, but there'll be a lot of people in Scotland who will instantly not want to sign up to it because there's a level of involvement of the UK government in this.
Yeah, with GCHQ and cybersecurity service.
People will just be deeply suspicious about exactly what information is being harvested.
Well, if I could come back to Sam, perhaps on this question, Sam.
Yeah.
It says quite clearly in the description of how the app is supposed to work that the information is, first of all, it's anonymised, so your name and even your location aren't mentioned. It is just your phone number, apparently, that is registered on the app. And it will only trace the phone numbers of other people you come into contact with if you ask the app to do that, should you become infected. So there is a degree of control in this app, it seems. It's not all snooping. It seems to be very much, there's an element of control given to the user.
The thing is, though, with them having a central database, they can download information and store that. Mm-hmm. And even when the app stops working, that will still then be stored, that information. And the thing also as well, when they're tracing through your mobile number, your mobile number is connected to your name, your date of birth, your address, and
Indeed
your postal code. Yeah. So with mobile phone companies, so there's still a way of being able to hold and store information. And we have known through time with various apps, various different technology that is around, with, I'm not going to mention any of the names, but people know, where companies have been allegedly basically storing information and selling it on to third parties and using it for other purposes. So there's got to be, in order for me personally to be able to sign up to this app, I would want 100% reassurances that my data is not going to be stored somewhere else and then signed on. There's lots of things I refuse to sign up to, and it's not about snooping or people spying on me. It's about my right as a citizen to privacy and not having my details sold on. I don't see why a company or the government should be able to make money from selling on my details.
Sam, I think we could all agree about that. I've just been told, incidentally, that even Google and Apple were not keen to have a central database for storing information on the app, which is what the British government has decided to do. So the rest of Europe has not done the central database. Again, Britain is well out of step with the rest of Europe by having a centralised database. Curious, I think, Chris, what do you think? Is this a deliberate attempt to find a way of tracking people's movements, who they're meeting?
Yeah, I mean,
or could it be used that way later?
Britain will want to do their own thing because we have withdrawn from the collaboration with the EU and stuff like that. So we'll want to be having our own nuanced app. And if that involves centralisation, then be it. That involves centralisation.
Chris, I'd like to stop you there for the moment, Chris. We need to move on to our next story, but it is related to what we've just been talking about. which I think we can sum up quite neatly by saying it's about Brexit, basically. Fears that Brexit talks could collapse in June, but the UK is still optimistic. The United Kingdom is still optimistic about striking a trade deal with the EU, but has warned that talks could collapse in June unless Brussels abandons its demands for a common fisheries policy and a level playing field, a source close to the UK's negotiating team said. The source said only limited progress in bridging the gaps between us had been made at last week's talks, but there was confidence that progress can be made quite quickly. The two sides will come closer to an agreement before the high-level meeting between ministers planned for June, if the UK is to stay at the negotiating table. Boris Johnson is expected to take a more active role trying to help unblock talks if that date approaches with no breakthrough between negotiators at the level of officials. Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said that the chances of a deal were definitely better than 2-1. Responding to those claims, the chances of a Brexit deal, an EU diplomat said that the UK was taking a high-stakes gamble. Everybody knows that the UK is the world of betting men, but betting alone won't result in a trade agreement. The continent is engulfed by COVID, as is the UK, so I wouldn't bank on leaders having as much time to cater to British fancy, the diplomat said. Recovery comes first and last, and a trade deal with the UK is of course a necessary element, but not one that needs to be addressed urgently. A second EU diplomat said if Number 10 doesn't change its negotiating approach, we will very likely be looking at a no-deal scenario. So we take this statement on the positive chances of a deal by Michael Gove as a welcome sign that the UK will change its negotiating stance and start talking on the basis of a joint political declaration, a reference to the document agreed between the EU and Boris Johnson last October. EU officials do not share London's optimism. Last week, the EU negotiator Michel Barnier accused the government of running down the clock, slowing down discussions on important areas. The EU has accused Johnson of backsliding on promises to uphold common standards on the environment, on health and workers' rights, the so-called level playing field. Under pressure from coastal member states such as France, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands, Barnier has also insisted that there will be no trade deal without an agreement on fishing rights. So we're coming right back to basically what was supposed to have happened this year already, which is these detailed talks about the future trade arrangements for the United Kingdom and the European Union. If I can come to you first, Sam, I know this is a very broad topic to talk about, but it would seem like there's still a game of chicken going on here, with one group saying one thing and somebody else setting out another position, but neither seem to be wanting to move. And I'm struggling to see what, if anything, has changed. Do you think there has been a change in the language being used, at least?
We keep talking about this. Is a subject that keeps coming up on the show, isn't it, Gordon?
I'm afraid
about
so.
Brexit and the negotiations, and it just seems to be. I'm going to say what I keep on saying. Bang their heads together, especially Number 10. They just seem to be determined to run down the clock and go with a no deal, and that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
If they're not wanting that, they're not exactly doing themselves any favours, because that's what's coming across.
Okay.
And at this moment in time, the whole continent has got enough on their plate dealing with COVID-19.
Yeah.
I think that there's priority, and as everybody keeps saying, maybe. Number 10 should be asking for an extension, or they definitely should be asking for an extension.
Reading between the lines, the European Union's spokesperson, whoever that was clearly implying that the British government was taking risks here by mentioning gambling.
Yeah, they are, and it's diabolical, because this is people's lives and livelihoods it's going to affect. Yeah. As well, right across the board, not just in the UK, but right across Europe as well. So it looks as if the UK government are determined to go for a no-deal Brexit. From my point of view, that's what it looks like. I could be wrong, and I hope I am wrong. But that's what it looks like. It's like they're going for this. They're determined. They're taking this risk, and it's such a big risk to be taken right now.
Okay, listen, thank you for that, Sam. In a moment, I'll come back to you, Chris, but for the moment, I want to carry on with a related story, and that is a French boycott of imported fish. French retailers are apparently boycotting imported fish and processed fish from processors outside of France. The boycott seems to have had an effect on the price of fish landed in the northeast of Scotland. Reacting to the boycott, Elspeth MacDonald, the chief executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, said, "This is deeply regrettable at a time when markets have been devastated due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to be encouraging rather than restricting their operation. We're pressing the case with the UK and Scottish governments and have been in touch with the French embassy. Hopefully common sense will prevail and this discriminatory practice can be brought to an end swiftly." Now there we go, Chris, the French getting their revenge in before everybody else, it seems.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised, and it's, I hate to use the terminology of red lines, but the EU have said that this is, quintessentially a red line for them, and that is access to the coastal waters in, some shape or form of an agreement.
Yeah.
Where I fail to understand why the British government are so bloody minded in the pursuit of a no deal, that they can actually see it being achieved by default, and they are the ones that are going to cite that it's not their fault that we have ended up with a no deal. And all throughout it, the Brexit negotiations all last year was the fact that no deal was better than a bad deal.
Well, Chris, listen, I was just going to say
everything's went full circle for them, and they're rubbing their hands with glee. So it's not out with the realms of possibility that this is what they were actually hoping for, but in the global sense, as we are, all in this COVID-19 war, if you like, to use one of the British analogies, this conflict. In the last conflict, we all pulled together in order to, defeat fascism. So why don't we just all pull together for the next 2 years, put a stop on Brexit, have your Brexit in 2022, but let's get through this pandemic, which is costing people's lives.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, Chris. One of the things that I did when I read this story was I had to think about what the British government is trying to get out of this. And it seems to me that everything boils down to a completely clean break. That's what they're aiming for, because the British government seems to want to control all of its territorial waters rather than doing a fishing deal on the terms of the European Union. They want it to be on Great Britain's terms, as it were. Hence the reason for sticking so rigidly to their Brexit with no deal, I think.
Yeah, but let's not forget the fact that it was the British government that sold out the Scottish fishermen back in the 70s anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, who's to say that they won't sacrifice the Scottish fishing
the stocks?
The whole industry.
Yeah.
So that they can have their own sense of protectionism.
Well, it seems that at a time like this, when everything is in uproar, the temptation, of course, is to look after your own. Anyway, I'm going to move on, Chris, from fish now to banking. A rather difficult segue, that one. Anyway, banks are planning to dust off their no-deal Brexit plans as the December deadline looms. Banks are dusting off their no-deal Brexit plans as concerns deepen that Britain and the European Union won't agree a trade deal by December as the COVID-19 pandemic compounds fundamental disagreements over future relations. Financial services exports to the EU are worth about £26 billion a year, and although Britain left the bloc in January, it still has unfettered access until the end of December under a transition agreement, allowing banks, asset managers and insurers to continue serving their biggest export market. But that leaves the UK with just a few months to negotiate a trade deal with the EU that would come into effect in January to avoid so-called cliff edge in business activity. If it wants an extension to the transition period, it must ask Brussels by the end of June. Brexit is firmly back up on the agenda. People are talking about it and are very conscious of the very short time to get a deal agreed, said Catherine McGuinness, political leader of the City of London Financial District, adding that the financial industry groups met in recent days to discuss preparations. I don't think anyone is expecting a transition extension at the moment, but the timetable is very tight. We're dusting down our papers on the various solutions to the cliff edge problems. Despite fundamental disagreements in the talks and the political focus shifting to the pandemic, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has insisted that he won't request an extension. Britain has not gone away. Brexit has not gone away. It's full steam ahead. The trade negotiations are not going smoothly, and we have to assume some chance of an exit without a deal, a source at the major global bank said. The government's firm no extension stance has killed off lobbying efforts by the financial industry, the source added. Now, let me take this to Chris first. I think this one, Chris. Now, here we have an industry which, by anybody's standards, are not the most popular industry in the UK, the banking industry. But here they are. Banking are now dusting off their no-deal Brexit plans and appear to be expecting the worst, it seems.
Well, I was actually going to say, give you a suggestion of a segue, from fishing into banking, because the two of them are slippery buggers, if you ask me.
Right, okay.
Honestly, banks throughout the world, have constantly said that they are on the side of the customer, and yet they have constantly cut customer services. They have cut banks.
Yes, a lot of branches
banking
have closed.
outlets, and they're more progressing on to.
So the question here, Chris, the question here must be, which of the two will the UK government sell out then? Will it be the fishing industry or the banking industry, do you think?
Oh, no doubt. They will sell the fishing industry out without a blink of an eye.
It's not worth the same, is it?
And they will do everything and anything to protect the banks. We have seen it before, and we will no doubt see it again. The banks bring in too much money for the economy that it makes the fishing industry totally expendable.
Sam, if I might involve you in this conversation, one of the things which seems evident from this is that the part of the UK which will benefit most if there is a good trade deal for banking industry is, of course, going to be the southeast of England, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and that's all they're interested in, isn't it? And in Westminster as well, they're not interested in the rest of the UK. And as Chris says, they will sell out the fishing industry. They won't bat an eyelid doing that one. They will protect the banking industry because they always have done. And the joys is that's what happens when you vote in a Tory government. They're very authoritarian and right-wing, and they are very blinkered, and they have got one agenda and one agenda only, and that's financial, and it's certainly not the well-being of the citizens of the UK.
Okay, well, thanks, Sam. Okay, I think we'll move on from this story to our next. And this is also to do with money, I guess. The UK government must strengthen support to protect businesses, livelihoods and the economy, as coming from the SNP. The SNP has urged the UK government to strengthen financial support for businesses and people through the coronavirus pandemic, warning that the cost of not going further to support now will be more damaging in the long run for the UK's economic recovery. Responding to the Office for Budgetary Responsibility's publication of the analysis of the UK's economic policy response to the coronavirus, the SNP's Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis MP said, "The coronavirus pandemic has dealt a significant financial blow to our economy, has pushed businesses into hardship and damaged people's livelihoods through no fault of their own. With many sectors of the economy having to close their doors due to public health advice, strengthening financial measures during this crisis is more important than ever, and it's only right that businesses and individuals are supported. The cost of not going further to support now will only be more damaging in the long run, and I urge the UK Government to take bold and comprehensive action to ensure a strong recovery and to build a fairer society." Sam, let's take you first on this one. So, the SNP have been saying this kind of thing for quite some time now, and apparently it hasn't been really acted upon by the Conservative government. But here they are again saying it's vital that small businesses are supported. So there are obviously still areas of small business which are not protected.
Yeah, there is, and every bit of help for any small businesses and self-employed is welcomed. And I know today, I believe the application's opened to 3 small new business support funds, and one of them is for self-employed people who have recently went self-employed and hadn't yet put in their full first year tax. Their books, their accounts. You know what I mean, Gordon?
For your full. Yes, I understand. So there's one of the hoops you have to jump through. Yeah,
that's one of those things that you need to sit and kind of write everything down and take note and then send it on to HMRC. Yeah, that one.
We will be talking about this later on in the show, actually, Sam, this very subject.
Will we? Oh, yeah, that one. But no, so that's good that that's now open today. So that's giving, because I know my neighbour had recently went self-employed in the last 5 months, so he was in that kind of limbo. Yeah. So this now covers him as well and his family, which is really good, and that's what's needed. But the UK government really, honestly, there you go. There's a Scottish government. What they're doing is, they're doing really well. Okay, they're still making mistakes. There's still things that are not 100% perfect, but they're doing a fantastic job. Yeah. And then you see the UK government, whose attitude is, there's going to be people fall through the cracks, but hey ho, let's get on with it, And it's just a terrible attitude to have. And the small businesses sector, regarding what sector they come from, they need support because they need to be able to reopen their doors, offer their services and their businesses once, the lockdown starts to ease off, and get the economy moving again. Okay. And they don't seem to understand. The UK government doesn't seem to get that for some reason. Perhaps they
need to get out and actually speak to some self-employed people. Chris, I was going to ask you something about this story as well, because one of the things that annoys me personally as a self-employed individual is the sheer number of hoops that the government makes us jump through. Because whenever they say we're going to give millions of pounds to small businesses and they trumpet it in the media, they don't tell you about all the preconditions that you have to meet in order to get any of the money at all.
Yeah, and it's quite funny because the smaller the business that you are, the bigger the hoops you've got to jump. Indeed. Whereas the bigger the business are, then the smaller the hoops are made by the UK government. Mm-hmm. So if you're bringing a revenue in of 500 million, then there's very, very few boxes for you to tick off. However, if you're struggling to bring in 50,000, then it seems like there are just reams and reams of paper to fill out, and everything seems to be done in triplicate. But what I was going to mention was that Alison Thewlis is making these calls, and she's basically echoing and asking the government to mirror the additional investment that Fiona Hislop mentioned yesterday, I think. Yes. Of an additional 100 million. To help the small businesses.
And we will be talking about that subject later in the programme, Chris. That very same story, will come to that later today. in this programme. So anyway, we're moving on again, and with a mixture of pressures on businesses at the moment, it's inevitable that some retail shops are going to go out of business, and the next story is actually just about two of those. Oasis and Warehouse are to close permanently, it's emerged today, with a loss of over 1,800 jobs. Oasis and Warehouse are to permanently close all their stores and online shopping with a loss of more than 1,800 jobs after administrators said that they'd been unable to secure a rescue deal for the fashion chains. The two brands have been sold to the restructuring firm Hilco, the owner of home-based DIY chain, in a deal which includes their stock but not their 92 standalone stores, or about 400 concessions across outlets including Debenhams, House of Fraser and Sainsbury's. Rob Harding, the joint administrator at Deloitte, said that COVID-19 had presented extraordinary challenges which have devastated the retail industry. And it's with great sadness that we have to announce the sale of a business has not been possible, and that we are announcing so many redundancies today. This is a very difficult time for the group's employees and other key stakeholders, and we will do everything we can to support them through this. Oasis and Warehouse called in administrators earlier this month and made 200 head office staff redundant without any payoff. The 1,800 people now being made redundant have been on furlough under the government's job retention scheme, and the administrators said payment to those staff would not be made until funds had been received from the government. A further 42 head office staff remain in post under the administrators, but their jobs remain at risk. The collapse of the fashion chains is yet another blow for high streets and shopping centres after a wave of closures in the last 2 years amid tough consumer markets and rising costs. The temporary enforced closure of clothing chains and other retail outlets deemed non-essential under government efforts to prevent the spread of the coronavirus has only added to the difficulties. Now, Sam, if I might come to you first here. I am not the world's most fashionable man, as you could probably see, and I am not nearly as well up on fashion chains as perhaps other people might be. So perhaps you can help enlighten me.
You're asking the wrong person, Gordon.
I have, I'll be honest with you, I had only ever heard of one of these firms, and I was surprised that I knew so little about it. But fashion chains always seem to be one of the first casualties in major economic crises, don't they?
Yeah, they do. I'm afraid you're asking the wrong person. I'm just not a follower of fashion.
You're not a follower of fashion either. I'm sorry, so I'm making assumptions.
I'm pretty much.
I'll ask Chris, he's very fashionable.
I'm in the wrong area, and I should be. I'm basically a kind of hippie at heart, so I generally have my own style. But no, I have heard of Oasis and Warehouse. So
I've heard of Warehouse, I think, but not Oasis.
But however, I'm wondering, I mean, when you were kind of talking about the story there, what was going through my head was, yeah, like that, there's certain businesses during a crisis that seem to go first. And it seems to be, I'm wondering, this is just the way my brain's thinking right now, so please forgive me if I get it wrong. I'm wondering if it's got something to do with their business plan and their business models. If they're so focused on, profits rather than investing. Because as small business owners and self-employed like yourself and me, when we're making money, we put that straight back into our business.
Yes, and reinvest it, you mean? Yeah.
We do. Yeah, we invest our money back into our business. We invest, and it's about the ethics of our business and everything else, and our reputations. Whereas big businesses, corporations and things generally don't reinvest. They do, but they don't. They're more about profits and about the kind of top end, big salaries and things like that.
Yeah.
And the lower end, people getting really low wages and things like that. So I'm wondering if this is what we're seeing right now, because there seems to be quite a lot of businesses. In some different sectors, you wonder if maybe this is what's happened.
Well, what I was going to say, Sam, is that the problem I think with fashion industries is they have to hold a lot of stock against what they think they're going to sell during a season. And then, of course, something comes along and nobody buys anything, and they're left with all of that stock.
If you look at the moment, nobody's out shopping every Saturday and Sunday and every other day of the week. we're on lockdown, and even online. I wonder if their online sales have dropped as well because people don't have money. People are in furloughed at the moment, and one of the interesting things that I heard, it was either yesterday, today. Forgive me, my days are starting to kind of join together now. The joys of lockdown, but there's seemingly, out of all the businesses that have applied for the money for the furlough scheme, only about 2/3 of them haven't received that money yet from the government. So you've got all these people who are either not getting paid or very low wages at the moment.
Of course, that's part of the problem, isn't it?
That has a knock-on effect, because I know with my son, his company he works for hasn't had their money yet.
But this is the problem without money flowing, nothing happens because
nothing moves.
Yeah, the businesses aren't making money, so they can't pay the staff.
No,
the staff don't have money, so they can't buy the goods, and it
becomes stalemate, and that's the problem. Everything becomes to a standstill, and and this is what's happening. In order to get the economy movement, there needs to be money.
Yeah,
money needs to be moving, and
money doesn't.
It's not. It's a vicious circle.
Money's worthless unless it's changing hands, as they say.
That's very true.
Well, listen, we've run out of time on this story. I'd like to move on to the next story, which I think is quite a serious one this time. Arab foreign ministers have condemned an Israeli plan to annex parts of the occupied West Bank. This step, if taken, would eliminate the possibility of embodying an independent, sovereign, geographically connected and viable Palestinian state. The step, if completed, would end the two-state solution, Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said during the meeting. Netanyahu said on April the 26th that the United States would give Israel the nod within 2 months to move ahead with de facto annexation of parts of the occupied lands. The Arab countries urged Washington to abide by UN resolutions and withhold support for plans and maps of the Israeli occupation government woven under the cover of so-called American-Israeli deal of the century, the statement said. Palestinians have flatly rejected a US peace proposal announced by the President Donald Trump in January, partly because it awards Israel most of what it has sought during the decades of conflict, including nearly all of the occupied land on which it has built settlements. Arab states on Thursday also urged the European Union countries to exert pressure on Israel to cancel its plans for the West Bank and to recognise a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 to save the hope of peace and a two-state solution. Chris, I know this is something which would probably interest you, but what do you make of this new move to annex what essentially was illegally occupied lands during the 1967 war?
Well, I mean, again, this doesn't surprise me. Netanyahu was never a believer in the two-state solution, and he was ably backed up by the election of Trump, and this is just further oppression of the Palestinian people to give up their land, which is rightfully theirs.
It's surely a very provocative move, this, Chris. I mean, Donald Trump caused absolute outrage when he moved the American embassy into Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, and now the Israelis are planning to move to consolidate their, you might call them ill-gotten gains, but these lands which are still disputed, and according to the UN still belong to the Palestinians.
Yeah, but he actually done that by not actually confirming that it was an American embassy, and he described it as an American office. And that's how he tried to sort of wriggle out of that. But anybody who keeps an eye on the Israeli-Palestinian issue will not be surprised to learn that behind closed doors, Netanyahu and Trump have been systematically trying to do the Palestinian people out of their rightful land. And this now of agreeing to annexations of the certain parts of Palestine is basically only pushing them further back
Well, it reminds me, Chris, a little bit of when the Russians annexed Crimea recently and the outrage that caused in the West. And this, so far, I'm not sure whether it's caused the same amount of outrage, but my knowledge of the geography of Israel and Palestine is that if the Israelis do annex these lands, then it basically encircles all of Palestine. Palestine becomes an island, an Arab island inside Israeli territory, which means that there is no way that they can have a viable two-state solution then.
Yeah, and it's deliberately done so in order to keep control of the Palestinian people and keep them under oppression.
Of course, Gaza is famous for being completely encircled itself. In Gaza, although it connects with Egypt, it has a wall around it and is apparently like a gigantic open-air prison.
Yeah. But
it's been compared to one.
Again, this has been carefully drawn up, and it is no wonder that the Palestinian people do not want to sign up to this. Okay. From the get-go, way back in 1967 when it was first mooted, the fact that the most viable option would be a two-state solution.
Well, it would make sense, would it not, surely, to have a peaceful side-by-side Palestine and Israel rather than have the one kind of eating the other, which is what this geographical solution of Israel seems to suggest.
Well, yeah, and you only need to look at recent history where you would have never said in a month of Sundays that we would have had peace in Northern Ireland, and then all of a sudden it was perfectly feasible and perfectly manageable to have two different countries sharing the same land.
Indeed, yeah.
Effectively, it is the same land.
Well, we have seen that in Northern Ireland. That could actually be held up as a solution. Sam, what do you think on this? Can we learn anything from the experience in Northern Ireland? Maybe apply it to this?
I'm sure there's always things that we can learn from what the peace treaty in Northern Ireland, because that took a lot of work and dedication from a lot of people on both sides. However, with Palestine and Israel, I just think what's happening with Palestine is just absolutely disgusting right now, and I can understand why they're not wanting to agree to this two-tier at the moment. As Chris says, they would be encircled, which would cut them off from doing any. They're still being controlled from the back door, so to speak, because how are they going to do trade with other countries? For importing and exporting. So even tourism, everything is going to be controlled by the Israeli state in terms of, planes, airspace, the lot. So, basically it's still it's controlling them through the back door.
Of course.
And I think it's quite sneaky. It's very sneaky and it's very deliberate.
Israel already does this with Gaza, where they actually control the flow of food, of building materials, of workers. Everything has to be agreed and okayed by Israel before any Palestinian worker is allowed to go anywhere. This would indeed just encircle the whole of Palestine.
It does, and it's just very sneaky, and it's just a way of being able to take over and occupy another country. And Donald Trump, are we surprised that this is what he's, his input in this?
Okay.
Yeah,
my opinion of him is.
Well, listen. Speaking
one other thing, Gordon, can I just make one other thing that
if
I have to point out?
You've got about 10 seconds.
The difference between Ireland and the situation going on in Israel and Palestine at this moment in time is the fact that in Ireland there wasn't an architect direction of apartheid, and there is actually living apartheid within Palestine at this moment in time, and that has been pursued by the Israeli government.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Chris. Speaking of Donald Trump earlier on there brings us to our next story. This is about Joe Biden. The Democratic presidential candidate, Joe Biden, is assigning 4 close campaign allies to head up the process leading to one of its most important decisions, picking a running mate. Biden, who served as Barack Obama's vice president, chose one of his former Senate colleagues, two elected politicians of colour, and a former aide to run a panel that scours the backgrounds of those who could be the first US female vice president. The panel's co-chairs are US Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, a former US Senator Chris Dodd, and aide Cynthia Hogan, his campaign said in a statement on Thursday. The former vice president has vowed to choose a woman for the role, and he hopes to complete the vetting by July. His choice has spurred special interest amongst voters on the campaign trail, who regularly ask who he will pick and sometimes express concern whether Biden, who's now 77, would serve a maximum of 2 terms of 4 years each if elected as president. These 4 co-chairs reflect the strength and the diversity of our party and will provide a tremendous insight and expertise to what will be a rigorous selection and vetting process, Biden's campaign manager, Jen O'Malley-Dillon, said in a statement. Another one of the broader campaign co-chairs, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, is among those Biden is thinking about picking as a possible running mate. Others tipped for consideration include Senators Amy Klobuchar and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. Each once fought Biden for his party's presidential nomination. The committee will closely scrutinise possible candidates for actions that could imperil Biden's election odds ahead of his November 3rd face-off with the Republican President Donald Trump. I think actually I'll talk to you first, Sam. This, I think, is a story which is really unusual in America. For the first time, the Republican Party is picking a female candidate for the role of vice president should Joe Biden win. I think this is newsworthy, particularly in America, where women have not featured very strongly at all, it seems.
Yeah.
Until now.
Until now. Yes. Basically, I don't know. As a female, I think it's great that, women in America are getting this opportunity to stand as vice president. However, I'm very kind of wary of the reasons behind it. Is there another reason? Whether you
feel a little cynical about this?
Yeah,
Sam.
I'm a bit cynical, in a sense of, I've always been a great believer, the job should go to the best person, regardless of their gender. The best person able to do the job. Yeah. So I'm a bit kind of wary in terms of why they've deliberately turned around and said it must be a woman. I'm sure the women will be more than able and capable and whatever. Yeah. But there seems to be, I have that wee kind of suspicion there of, having this announcement, and the way they're going around it. It's like, oh, look at us, get the flags out. Oh,
you think they're really,
as if they've, everybody should.
They're doing what's known as virtue signalling.
When it should be. Yeah. So, I'm a bit cynical about it, Gordon. Yeah.
Okay. Sam, listen, we have to leave this story just now and move on. Our next story is actually another good news story for change. £100 million have been made available to help businesses. A £1 million package of additional grant support for small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, and newly self-employed people opens for applications later today. The 3 separate funds will be administered by local authorities and Scotland's enterprise agencies and will begin to pay out grants in early May. They include a £34 million hardship fund for the newly self-employed, something we spoke about a little while ago, and a £20 million fund for small and micro enterprises in the creative, tourism and hospitality sectors, and £45 million for viable SMEs crucial to the Scottish economy, which are vulnerable. The Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop said, "Our economy has been hit hard by this crisis, and previously profitable businesses have seen demand dry up overnight. Our support will help alleviate the hardship these individuals and companies are facing. I'm particularly pleased that we're able to help the newly self-employed who do not qualify for the UK scheme and are facing financial hardship as a result of the coronavirus. We also recognise the particular impact of COVID-19 on our creative, tourism and hospitality sectors at what would normally be the busiest period. This fund is intended to relieve the hardship of smaller firms that are ineligible for other forms of support. As well as dealing with this immediate crisis, we must look to the future. In all sectors with a part to play, we must ensure that viable and vital businesses in all sectors with a part to play in strengthening the resilience of Scotland's economy survive this crisis and thrive in the future, which is why £45 million is being allocated to support these firms. Scottish Greens welcomed the announcement but said eligibility criteria must come under scrutiny. Business grants are designed to protect small businesses that are vital to the Scottish economy, but at virtual parliamentary questions, the Scottish Green MSP Andy Whiteman raised concerns that many small businesses are missing out due to their particular circumstances conflicting with detailed eligibility rules. Mr. Whiteman said many small businesses that play such an important role in our communities have fallen through the cracks in emergency support, which is why I welcome the extra funding streams launched today. However, constituents have told me some businesses who pay rates and receive small business bonus scheme relief through their landlord have been refused existing business support by councils. And I have to ask the Scottish Government to look into helping small businesses to get everything they're entitled to. So, Chris, here's one, I think, which is a good news story. The SNP government, again, releasing funds to help small businesses in Scotland.
Yeah, well, it is welcome. And it's very much needed, and especially as the fact that they've identified, 3 or 4 different sectors that is actually going to benefit from this. But I would want the Scottish Government to actually promote this, get it out on social media, get it out in the mainstream media, and shame the UK government in the fact that this is an additional 100 million. It is not new. It is not from what we've already got from Barnett Consequentials. This is additional new money.
It's good that there's money in, Chris. It
has to be welcomed. It has to be lauded. And again, I will go along with the Greens because it seems to me that they have narrowed the qualifying criteria down. That many, dare I use the word, SSMEs, as in small, micro industries will not be able to benefit from it. Just purely down to the square footage of their premises, or
Yeah. Okay. Well, they are actually covered in this, Chris. Apparently, according to the information we've received, that these are designed to fill in those gaps. I'm going to move to our final story tonight. We're coming up near to the evening clap, but Sam, I mean, this story about money for small businesses, I'm not, but particularly for creative industries, this hasn't happened before. We haven't had creatives being given specific help like this before.
No, creatives haven't been given specific help, and that's one sector that finds it very, very difficult in order to get funding, because it's taken a long time for the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government thankfully now recognises creative businesses as a viable industry in Scotland, whereas before traditionally they never had that kind of criteria or acknowledgement. So it is really good, because there's a lot of creative businesses out there who will be struggling and who are struggling right now. And I agree with Andy Whiteman saying, it must needs to be scrutinised, because it needs to be very carefully who's getting the money and who's not getting the money. Okay, Sam, listen, I'll have to stop you there. We're coming to our final story of the evening, and then we'll be going to the 8 o'clock NHS clap. Now, this is a story about Historic Environment Scotland using 3D printing to help protect coronavirus frontline workers. Historic Environment Scotland has repurposed technology at its National Conservation Centre, the Engine Shed in Stirling, to produce personal protective equipment visors for NHS staff who are battling the COVID-19 crisis across Scotland.
Working with Scottish Enterprise and Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, HES is using the facility's state-of-the-art 3D printing technology to produce specialist protective visors, with the first batch of 50 masks this week delivered to Glasgow's Queen Elizabeth University Hospital for staff in the maxillofacial department. The engine shed will now produce upwards of 50 PPE masks a week for the NHS and various organisations to support frontline staff across the country. HES is also working with the recently formed Emergency Conservators Network, the ECN, which has been set up to facilitate conservation involvement throughout the through addressing PPE shortages throughout the UK. Now, we are just coming up to the 8 o'clock round of applause for the NHS, and that should be happening in about 10 seconds. So I hope you're there. Chris, are you ready? I can see Mr.
Yeah, I'll just get up and see who's coming out.
I can see Mr. McCusker heading to his front door now. That's it. It's now 8 o'clock, Chris. We can start our applause now.
So. There you go. Oh, hiya. That's my neighbour up the stairs. Don't know how to do it. But yeah. We've got a few out on the street again tonight.
Oh, that's a shame we don't have our dancer again, Chris, like we had last week.
Unfortunately, Cara has not come out tonight. I don't know what the story is there.
Oh, that's a shame.
I did have a wee word with her, and she was quite chuffed to be on Broadcasting Scotland last week. So,
well, one day we'll have her back on again later on, Chris, if we can track her down at some point.
Yeah. I would.
Yeah, when all this is finished, maybe she can dance for us properly at the studio.
Very possibly, yeah. I could ask her to.
Maybe we should have, Chris, all the rising stars that you've found during the 8 o'clock clap over this year. We'll bring them all into the studio together.
Well, we can only do that with the social distancing, Gordon. But hopefully, it might happen after we come out of lockdown.
Well, I hope so, Chris. It would be nice to be able to do something special for them, since they made such a great effort themselves.
There's a nice warm round of applause going round, and some pot rattling going on as well up in Newton Mearns. So
you know, that's terrific.
It's good to see.
Okay, well, listen. Thanks very much, Chris, for your efforts to show us what's going on in your street tonight. Well, listen, we are now just coming to the end of the show, but I'm just going to wait for Chris to get back to his computer screen and into position again so that I can wind the show up. But usually at this time in the programme, I will make my usual request for funding. And of course, Broadcasting Scotland is a voluntary organisation. We're not for profit, and we require your help to keep making programmes. It's through our supporters that we gain our funding, and if you would like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland to help us make even more and better programmes, you can do so by following the instructions on the bottom part of your screen now. Go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and follow the prompts there. That's it from Broadcasting Scotland and Scotland at 7 for this week. I'll be back again on Monday at 7 o'clock. But until then, stay safe and have a great week. Bye for now.
Right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good. Very